nothing beats a good mystery, don't you think? And I've got a handful of mysteries to talk about today. The first one up is Kate Atkinson's Death at the Sign of the Rook. Now, this is one of the Jackson Brodie detective series or sleuthing series. It's about number 6. This one has a feel very much of that Agatha Christie cozy crime. I mean, Jackson Brodie has that kind of laid back, sort of laconic, hapless, kind of shambling feel. And he's, you know, not police, he's, private. But his sidekick, Reggie, is a detective constable. So we have a little duo, and she's kind of unwilling most of the time. He co-opts her because, he always manages to dangle the carrot in front of her. This one is set in Yorkshire and mostly around the disappearance of art. It's set and opens with a kind of Agatha Christie entry, where you've got the Great House. So we're set in Burton Makepeace, which is a large estate, and Lady Milton still resides there, and there are 2 sons, Piers and Cosmo, neither of whom seem to deliver the goods when it comes to the bloodline. But a big famous painting had been snaffled from there. And that's part of our story. When we open this, we have all of these different players who arrive like on the set. And I think that that's one of the things that Atkinson's kind of having a little bit of fun with, because there are traveling actors who have come to this country house that's trying to sort of survive by any means possible, which involves having guests and tours and hotel and all sorts of events. And this is a murder mystery event which is going to take place in the house, and happens to have been scheduled for the night of a massive snowstorm, and lots of other people sort of pile in, and real murders and things are also investigated at the same time. There is a huge cast in this. We open after this sort of prefaced scene of giving us the Agatha Christie tone. We open where Brodie has been called to a house of Ian and Hazel Paget. I think Paget, yeah. And Ian's mother, Dorothy, has recently deceased. There had been a painting on the wall behind the door, which has since disappeared. And also disappeared and untraceable is Melanie, who had been this almost not too good to be true, but you kind of feel very perfect companion and carer, and they have kind of associated the 2 things. And when we get to Burton Makepeace, we also know that there had been an absolutely phenomenal housekeeper named Sophie Greenway, who also has disappeared, and so has a large and very valuable painting. How are these stories tied up? Who is Sophie / Mel? There are other people in the story which allow us have, all sorts of tensions and possible human interactions. There's an escaped convict. There's a amputee war veteran who's not really doing very well and lives with his sister and friend down the road. And we find everybody blundering about during this snowstorm or knocking on the door of this great house because they've all got lost. And you'll find out that an awful lot of people know how to shoot a gun and shoot it properly. There are also a lot of guns that misfire, and a lot of other things misfire. It is an absolute romp and retains all the time this kind of Agatha Christie style. It's poshed up in a way, and it's absolutely hilarious, but a really solid sort of, it's complex. It's really very well plotted, and a great laugh and a great story, and you won't regret a second of the time you spent inside this novel. Another one that you won't regret is The Death of Dora Black by Lainie Anderson. Now, this is an absolute stunner set in Adelaide in 1917. So we're right in, the world of, 1917, where there'll be returning war veterans, there'll be unwanted pregnancies, there'll be poverty, there'll be families struggling, there'll be widows. And this detective series, which I'm hoping it's a series because I've read number 1 and I'm going, give me more, please. In this series, we have this sort of, which I find is exceptionally well documented, this kind of historical and well researched look at what the society was like. Who were the people who came back? What were the sort of crimes we're going to be looking at in that era, and how was society structured? An eye opener for me. We have at the same time, based on a real life Kate Cox, the first female police officer on the force. And the duties of said police officer were really restricted to sort of being like the enforcer of the moral code. So it's sort of, it is said that Kate Cox walked around with her 3-foot pole and said, to young lovers canoodling 3 feet apart, or whatever it was. And that was the duty of Kate Cox as the first police officer. And in this book, we have a sidekick who's not necessarily based on a true character, but who allows us, Ethel Bromley, who allows us into the world of the kind of the upper echelons of society, because she's well-born and has well-connected aunts. And we get to look at what I absolutely loved as we look at these wives of women, men in power. We look at these women who, you think are just sort of wives, but they're getting things done. And in that sort of old-fashioned plummy way, things get solved. Influence is wielded. We have for our crime that are very straight-laced and rather sort of filled with moral rectitude in a way, Kate Cox. We have her investigating. Well, she's not supposed to investigate, and this is the point. But she can't help herself. A young woman is found on the docks, and she's been murdered. She's called Dora Black, and the book is named for her. And she had worked as a salesperson in an emporium frequented by Kate Cox, who rather likes nice things. Don't we all? And then another young saleswoman person goes missing. And then we have to look at all of the connections that Kate Cox and Ethel are making. And they're trying to persuade their male, the commissioner and all that, to let them keep doing this. And he keeps squishing and squashing. And eventually, they were just such gorgeous characters, because even though you've got this kind of, upstanding sort of, I will enforce the law and do what I'm told and deal with the problems that, my, police chief has said I'm to look after, you get this welling frustration of these women, of Kate and Ethel, and the fact that eventually guts, pure gutsiness, intuition, this frustration, and the fact that they're joining dots that other people aren't, or maybe might not, makes them sort of get involved in human trafficking, prostitution, of setting up of brothels, trafficking of young girls, and opium trade. It was an absolutely phenomenal read. Word perfect, faultless, great fun, lots of wit, lots of opportunity for looking at how society is run and who wields power and who's in on all the different things that are happening. I'm not going to tell you any more because I'll end up giving it all away, and I better shut up. So that's that one. Super. Yeah, and I'm just really waiting for another one from Lainie Anderson. And the last one up today is The Oxenbridge King by Christine Paice. Different sort of mystery, but it's still very mysterious. I loved this for so many reasons. The language, I think, was a joy. It's set in, well, it's kind of set in time, no time, and 2012. So what I mean by that is we're following the soul of Richard III after the Battle of Bosworth, when he's kind of wandering around saying, how am I going to get to God or to heaven or my divine reward if I deserve that? He's accompanied by a raven, who is his guide to kind of a limbo state, where we are waiting for the angel who is supposed to take, show him the way to heaven. And you feel, or you learn very fast, that this smart talking raven is letting him know that unless he can confront the murder of the princes in the Tower, for which he was responsible, there ain't no getting to heaven. That crow is the funniest, or raven. Huge fun with this kind of liminal space, which is superbly well. And sort of, it's that kind of swirly, you don't know where your feet are. We moved to 2012 to Oxenbridge, where the Abbey of Stern was Stern Abbey, which is mostly a ruin now. And well, we kind of moved there after we've looked at a historical part where we see Richard III arriving there, and he comes, he crosses paths with Daedalus, who is a monk who is committed to his king and committed to his divine king, and the tragedy that ensues, where he's sort of been awed by the arrival of this king and the connection and the great love he feels, and then the subsequent death and the the kind of the trauma that followed that. And you follow Daedalus and how all of those things pan out for the king and for him and for the other people in this small community in Stern Abbey. And then we come to the modern day, where we have young Molly Stern living in Oxenbridge House, whose father has recently died. The mother is no longer in the picture at the moment. I've given that away in a bit, but you kind of already know this. And who is reeling from a bad love affair with somebody who's not entirely committed to her, has a much-loved aunt and uncle, Peggy and Frank, and who works in an art gallery, and who is a bit... She's had her feet sort of taken out from under her, and she's stumbling about, not insecure, unsure of herself, and between one thing and the other, between Frank, who's manically interested in the history of Richard III, and we know from real history that when the bones were disinterred and they found him, they interred him in with full ceremony. Frankie's sort of tunnelling under his garden shed. There are tunnels underneath everything. There's an awful lot going on that's super mysterious. And this Daedalus has kind of come back in the form of said angel that everybody, or at least that Peggy, that Molly herself and her father, and as it turns out her mother, had believed there was an angel living in the house. Now, it's got that feel of Sally Vickers, who wrote Miss Garnet's Angel, that sort of supernatural encroaching on the natural world. But it's a book of great mystery and beauty. I think the language sort of, it swoops. It's a kind of a dance of language. It reminded me, and of course it's referenced in the book, and I can see why, of some of the poetry, particularly Gerard Manley Hopkins, Glory be to God for dappled things. There's this kind of language of poetics that make this the most... I mean, how can you talk about souls and spirits wandering around in the afterworld without saying, well, there was a soul and a spirit wandering around the afterworld? It's visceral. It's about feeling things. And Daedalus, as a monk who's long dead but is incorporated into this form, has to he comes out into the real world when Molly sort of finds out about him and lets him out. And he is sort of tries to live humanly in it, and is sort of bombarded with sensation. So it's a book about sensation and about feeling and about the inner and the outer and of what is soul a thing. It is the most glorious piece of writing, and all of the small cast of characters, and it's really very small, from Peggy and Frank, who have been married for a long time in their own marriage. You know, like any marriage has its little, you know, Frank has his obsessions, and Peggy's kind of like, oh my God. Peggy has a craft and wool shop, and she has a young man who works for her who's completely hapless and completely mourning the guiding star of his life, who'd been his mother. He's kind of gotten a fascination, though he's much younger, than Molly, and kind of thinks that Molly should notice them. Molly doesn't believe that her father, you know, she knows her father's dead, but doesn't really know what's what until she meets this Daedalus, and she kind of goes all in for, let's accept the other in the world. Superb writing, and I very much enjoyed that one. So there's 3 for you. I will have more for you soon.